Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. It was a typical summer morning in July 2025 when the residents of the South Bronx began a routine Wednesday near the corner of Cortlandt Avenue and East 149th Street. They expected nothing more than the usual humid air and the rhythmic hum of a city in motion. But what they found on that sidewalk would change the history of this neighborhood forever. Hidden in plain sight for 8 long months, a secret was about to be unmasked. One that proved the most dangerous moments can arrive on the most familiar streets. Tonight, we look into the quiet shadows of the Bronx Mustang mystery. The air in the Bronx during early July has a specific texture. It is thick, heavy with the scent of asphalt and the distant metallic tang of the elevated trains. At 11 o'clock in the morning, the intersection of Cortlandt and 149th is a place defined by its predictability. Vendors set up their stalls. The elderly move with practiced caution toward their destinations, and younger commuters weave through the crowd with the frantic energy of New York life. It is the kind of place where people look out for one another, a community built on the shared experience of navigating these specific blocks year after year. On this particular Wednesday, the sun was already high, casting long, sharp shadows against the brick facades of the apartment buildings. A 79-year-old woman was making her way along the sidewalk, her pace steady and rhythmic. Nearby, a 69-year-old man walked with the quiet purpose of someone who had walked these same paths for decades. They were joined by others, a 49-year-old woman, a 43-year-old man, and a younger couple, both 30 years old. 6 individual lives, each with their own histories and destinations, were converging on a single stretch of concrete. None of them could have known that they were stepping into a story that would remain an open wound for nearly a year. The sound of the city is usually a comforting white noise, but at 10:55 a.m., that harmony was shattered. There was no warning, no screech of tires or honk of a horn to signal the deviation from the norm. Instead, there was the sudden violent roar of a 2017 Ford Mustang. The vehicle did not stay within the painted lines of the road. It didn't swerve to avoid an obstacle. It climbed the curb and claimed the sidewalk as its own. In the seconds that followed, the predictable world of Cortlandt Avenue vanished. The Mustang, a heavy machine of glass and steel, moved through the crowd with an impossible, terrifying trajectory. It struck the 6 pedestrians, tossing bodies against the backdrop of the city they called home. The 79-year-old woman and the 69-year-old man, who had survived so much in their long lives, were suddenly victims of a mechanical assault on the very ground where they should have been safest. The car did not stop after the initial impact. It continued its path of destruction, eventually colliding with the heavy metal pipes of a sidewalk scaffolding. The sound of the crash, the grinding of metal on metal, and the shattering of a windshield was a recipe for disaster that echoed through the Bronx. And then, as quickly as the violence had begun, it was replaced by a different kind of horror: silence. The driver did not step out to render aid. He did not call for help. Instead, he opened the door of the shattered Mustang, abandoned the vehicle amidst the wreckage of the scaffolding, and fled on foot. He disappeared into the labyrinth of the Bronx streets, leaving behind a car with no license plates, a broken windshield, and 6 people bleeding on the pavement. As the dust settled and the hum of the city attempted to resume, the magnitude of the event began to sink in. Emergency vehicles soon filled the intersection, their sirens creating a discordant symphony against the summer heat. The victims were rushed to Lincoln Hospital. Miraculously, despite the violence of the impact, they were all listed in stable condition with minor injuries. The physical wounds would heal, but the psychological weight of that morning was only beginning to settle. In the aftermath, the NYPD warrant squad and local detectives began a search that would stretch across seasons. They had the car, a 2017 Ford Mustang with its front bumper almost completely torn off and its glass spiderwebbed from the force of the hits. But without license plates, the vehicle was a ghost. They had surveillance footage, grainy images of a young man fleeing the scene, but no name to attach to the face. The driver, later identified as 23-year-old Willie Joe Delgado, had managed to slip away into the vastness of the city. For 8 months, the families of the victims lived in a state of suspended justice. They walked those same streets, perhaps glancing nervously at every Ford Mustang they saw, wondering if the man who had turned their world upside down was standing right next to them in line at the grocery store. It was a case that seemed destined to go cold, a hit and run that would become just another statistic in a city that moves too fast to remember every tragedy. But the detectives did not stop. They traced the history of the car. They analyzed every frame of the surveillance footage, and they waited. They knew that in a city like New York, no one stays hidden forever if the right people are looking. The search for Willie Joe Delgado was not a sprint. It was an archaeological dig into the hidden systems of the city. Welcome back. I'm here to help you relax tonight as we explore the long road to justice in a case that many thought would never be solved. I know many of you use these stories to find a sense of calm at the end of a long day, and I'm glad you're here. Tonight's journey begins in the heart of the Bronx, a place known for its resilience until July 3rd, 2025, changed everything. As we settle into the details of this investigation, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Leave a comment below. It helps us feel a little less alone in the quiet hours. Adjust your volume, get comfortable, and let's begin the story of the search for the man behind the wheel. In the heart of the Bronx, where the rhythm of the city usually hums with predictable energy, a 2017 Ford Mustang did the unthinkable. It left the asphalt and claimed the sidewalk. It was just before 11 in the morning on July 3rd, a time when the humidity of a New York summer begins to settle heavily over the borough, making the air feel thick and the pace of life slightly more deliberate. On the corner of Cortlandt Avenue and East 149th Street, the usual Tuesday morning choreography was in full swing. People were heading to the subway, stopping for a quick coffee, or perhaps just enjoying the shade of the tall brick buildings that line this busy corridor. It was a scene of absolute normalcy, the kind of urban routine that feels permanent until the very second it is shattered. 6 pedestrians were simply walking through their neighborhood, unaware that a metallic shadow was approaching from behind with a terrifying, silent trajectory. These individuals represented a cross-section of the community. A 30-year-old man and woman, perhaps on their way to work. A 43-year-old man and a 49-year-old woman navigating their mid-morning errands. And two elders, a 69-year-old man and a 79-year-old woman, who had likely walked these specific sidewalks for decades. For them, the sidewalk was a sanctuary of sorts, a thin strip of concrete safety separated from the chaotic flow of Bronx traffic by a line of steel and curb. But in an instant, that boundary vanished. The Mustang didn't just graze the curb, it mounted it with a violence that left the front bumper almost completely torn from the chassis. The sound must have been haunting. The screech of high-performance tires losing their grip on the pavement, followed by the dull, heavy thud of metal striking stone, and eventually, the fragile bodies of those 6 neighbors. When the car finally came to a halt, it had struck a section of scaffolding, the metal pipes rattling with a rhythmic, skeletal vibration that echoed down the block. The windshield of the Ford was a spiderweb of fractured glass, a white, opaque mask that hid the face of the person responsible. As the dust and the smell of burnt rubber began to settle, a profound and eerie silence took hold. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Witnesses watched in a state of suspended disbelief as the driver's side door opened. There were no license plates on the front of the vehicle. There were no plates on the back. It was a ghost car, a high-velocity phantom that had just turned a sunny morning into a scene of carnage. Before the first sirens could be heard echoing from a few blocks away, the driver stepped out of the wreckage. He didn't check on the 79-year-old woman lying on the concrete. He didn't look back at the shattered glass or the twisted scaffolding. Instead, he simply walked away, vanishing into the maze of the Bronx streets as if he were just another commuter blending into the midday haze. This was the beginning of an 8-month mystery that would haunt the NYPD warrant squad. How does a man abandon a distinctive sports car in broad daylight in one of the most surveilled cities on Earth and simply disappear? Why was the car stripped of its identity, lacking even the most basic registration markers? To understand the weight of this moment, we have to look closely at the physical evidence left behind on that sidewalk. The shattered windshield that served as a silent witness to the impact, and the empty driver's seat that posed a question no one could answer for nearly a year. The investigators who arrived on the scene found themselves looking at a puzzle that defied the usual logic of a hit and run. Usually, there is a trail, a plate number caught by a passerby, a registration sticker in the window, or a VIN that leads directly to a front door. But here, the Mustang seemed designed to be anonymous. It was a high-performance machine used as a low-tech weapon, and the person behind the wheel had operated with a chilling lack of hesitation. As the victims were rushed to Lincoln Hospital, the neighborhood was left to wonder if this was a tragic accident or something far more calculated. The stakes were impossibly high. While the injuries were eventually classified as stable, the psychological trauma of being hunted on a sidewalk is a shadow that doesn't lift easily. For 8 months, the name Willie Joe Delgado was unknown to the public. He was merely a grainy image on a surveillance feed. a figure in a hoodie moving away from the wreckage with a calm that bordered on the supernatural. The search would take detectives through the back alleys of the digital world and the physical reality of the Bronx's hidden corners. It would require a meticulous reconstruction of the minutes leading up to the crash and the months of silence that followed. Tonight, we are going to look into the shadows of this investigation, tracing the path from that shattered windshield on Cortlandt Avenue to the moment the NYPD finally closed in on their target. As you settle in and let the sounds of the night outside your window blend with the narrative, think about the fragility of that morning. The air was warm, the coffee was hot, and the sidewalk was supposed to be safe. We are retracing a journey defined by a search for accountability in a city that never stops moving, even when the unthinkable happens on its very doorstep. The initial response by the NYPD was a whirlwind of activity, yet it was hampered by the very deliberate state of the vehicle left behind. When the first officers cordoned off the corner of 149th and Cortlandt, they weren't just looking at a car crash. They were looking at a crime scene that felt hollowed out. The Mustang, finished in a dark, aggressive tone, sat paralyzed against the scaffolding. The fact that it had no license plates was the first major red flag. In New York City, a car without plates is a beacon for police attention. Yet this driver had managed to navigate the busy morning streets of the Bronx unnoticed until the moment of impact. This suggests a level of familiarity with the area, a knowledge of which streets to turn down and which intersections to avoid. Detectives began the painstaking process of canvassing the area for cameras. In modern New York, you are almost always on film, but the quality of that film varies wildly. They looked at the feeds from bodegas, from the public housing complexes nearby, and from the traffic cams that hang like silent watchers over the intersections. They were looking for a sequence, a beginning to this violent middle. They wanted to see where the Mustang had come from. Had it been idling nearby? Was it being driven erratically blocks away? Or was the mounting of the sidewalk a sudden, sharp deviation from an otherwise normal drive? The condition of the car itself told a story of high-energy impact. The front bumper, designed to absorb energy, had been sheared away, exposing the mechanical skeletal structure of the Ford. The scaffolding it hit was part of a Department of Buildings regulated structure, meant to protect pedestrians from falling debris, yet it had become a secondary hazard. The Department of Buildings had to be called in to ensure that the impact hadn't compromised the structural integrity of the building above. Imagine the tension of that hour. 6 people in the hospital, a wrecked car with no identity, and a building that might or might not be leaning into the street. It was a logistical nightmare draped in human tragedy. The 69-year-old man and the 79-year-old woman became the emotional center of the community's concern. At that age, a fall on a sidewalk is a major event. Being struck by several thousand pounds of American muscle is a miracle to survive. The fact that they were transported to Lincoln Hospital in stable condition is a testament to the resilience of the human frame. But the minor injuries listed in the official reports often mask the long-term reality of such an event. There is the bruising that lasts weeks, the joint pain that never truly subsides, and the lingering fear every time a car engine's revs a little too loudly near a curb. While the victims began their long afternoon of scans and stitches, the driver was making his escape. He didn't run with the frantic energy of someone who had just made a mistake. He moved with a purposeful anonymity. This wasn't a joyride in the traditional sense, where a teenager panics and bolts. This felt like a disappearance. The NYPD released the first surveillance images quickly, hoping for a tip, but the streets stayed quiet. It's a phenomenon often seen in tight-knit neighborhoods where trust in authorities is complex. A tight-lipped silence that can shield a suspect for months. Investigators would later discover that the car hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. There is always a paper trail, even if it's buried under layers of private sales and ghost registrations. They had to go to the VIN, the vehicle identification number, etched into the dashboard and the engine block. This is the DNA of a car. But even with a VIN, the path isn't always linear. Cars like this often change hands in cash deals, moving through the under-the-cover-of-night economy where titles aren't signed and insurance isn't carried. The Mustang was a ghost, and its driver was becoming one too. As the days turned into weeks, the Bronx Mustang mystery began to fade from the front pages of the local news. But for the warrant squad, the file remained open and active. They were looking for a needle in a haystack of millions, waiting for that one person to recognize a gate, a piece of clothing, or a boast made in private. The 8-month gap between the crime and the arrest of Willie Joe Delgado suggests a game of cat and mouse that took place in the digital shadows of social media and the physical reality of the Bronx's apartment blocks. Tonight, as we go deeper into the mechanics of this arrest, we have to acknowledge the patience required in modern detective work. It isn't always about the high-speed chase. More often, it's about the quiet surveillance, the checking of records, and the waiting for the suspect to feel just comfortable enough to step back into the light. Willie Joe Delgado was 23 years old, a young man with his entire life ahead of him, now facing the weight of attempted murder charges for a few seconds of inexplicable action on a Tuesday morning. Why would a 23-year-old with no prior arrest record allegedly drive into a crowd? That is the question that keeps the open loop of this case spinning. Was it a moment of mechanical failure that he panicked over? Or was there something more sinister? A deliberate act of aggression that the prosecution is now labeling as attempted murder. The distinction between a car accident and attempted murder in the eyes of New York law is vast, and it hinges entirely on intent. To charge someone with attempted murder in a vehicular case, the state must believe that the driver didn't just lose control, but that they used the car as a weapon with the specific goal of ending a life. As you listen to the steady fall of the rain or the hum of your fan, visualize that Mustang sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of an NYPD impound lot. It is a mass of steel and glass that holds the secrets of July 3rd. The shattered windshield isn't just broken glass. It's a map of the impact, a physical record of the moment lives were changed. And as we transition into the next chapter of this investigation, we will look at how the police finally put a name to the shadow that walked away from the wreckage. The city of New York is a place of infinite stories, most of them mundane, many of them beautiful, but some like the story of Willie Joe Delgado, are defined by a sudden, jarring darkness. It's the kind of story that reminds us why we look twice before crossing the street, even when the light is green. It's a story about the long reach of justice and the fact that, in a city of 8 million people, you can run, you can hide, and you can even strip the plates off your car, but the rhythm of the city eventually catches up to you. The investigation didn't just happen on the asphalt. It migrated into the sterile, fluorescent-lit bays of the NYPD's forensic garages. When a vehicle is involved in a high-velocity impact resulting in catastrophic biological trauma, it ceases to be a mode of transportation. It becomes a diagnostic artifact, a 3,000-pound witness composed of alloy, polymer, and silicon. The Ford Mustang, now a mangled sculpture of kinetic energy gone wrong, sat under the scrutiny of collision technicians. Their first task was a comprehensive mechanical autopsy. The goal was simple but vital: eliminate the mechanical failure defense. If the defense later argued that a stuck throttle or a brake line rupture caused the carnage, the prosecution needed the empirical data to debunk it. Technicians documented the chassis deformation, noting how the structural integrity of the front-end assembly had buckled under the load of the impact. The crumple zones had performed their engineered duty, absorbing the momentum that would have otherwise crushed the occupant. But the exterior told a more violent story. There was a sickening irony in the preservation of the driver's seat, a protected bubble of safety amidst a perimeter of destruction. Investigators focused on the steering column and the supplemental restraint system, SRS. The driver's side airbag had deployed, a white nylon shroud stained with the chemical residue of the propellant, and more importantly, the biological transfer of the operator. This is where the shadow began to take on a physical form. On the textured surface of the airbag, forensic experts located a faint but undeniable smear of epithelial cells. In the world of culpable negligence, this is the smoking gun of identity. Beyond the physical wreckage lay the digital heart of the Mustang, the Event Data Recorder, EDR, often colloquially known as the car's black box. While the driver had fled the scene, he had forgotten that his vehicle was recording his every indiscretion in the seconds leading up to the tragedy. The data retrieval was chilling. It provided a high-resolution map of the Mustang's final trajectory. The EDR logged the throttle position sensor at nearly 90% wide open, indicating a deliberate and aggressive acceleration. The longitudinal delta V, the change in velocity, confirmed that the Mustang was traveling at a rate far exceeding the posted urban limits of the Bronx. Most damning was the brake switch status. The sensors indicated that the brake pedal was not depressed until a fraction of a second before the primary impact, suggesting a total lack of situational awareness or a blatant disregard for the pedestrians in the crosswalk. This wasn't an accident. In the eyes of the law, this was an exhibition of depraved indifference. The vehicle's own telemetry painted a picture of a driver who had weaponized a piece of machinery, treating the public thoroughfare like a private drag strip. While the mechanics worked the steel, the detectives worked the streets. The Bronx is a borough of eyes. It is a dense tapestry of bodega surveillance, doorbell cameras, and the ubiquitous presence of the NYPD's Argus cameras. The golden hour of a hit-and-run investigation is often spent chasing ghosts. But in the case of Willie Joe Delgado, the ghosts were captured in 1080p. Detectives began a systematic video canvass, radiating outward from the impact site. They weren't just looking for the crash. They were looking for the approach and the egress. They found a grainy sequence from a laundromat 3 blocks away. A Mustang, matching the description, weaving through traffic with a predatory twitchiness. Then, another clip from a private residence showing the vehicle moments after the plates had been removed, a desperate attempt to anonymize the weapon. However, the most significant breakthrough didn't come from a fixed camera, but from the digital exhaust we all leave behind. The NYPD's Real-Time Crime Center, RTCC, began cross-referencing the vehicle's VIN with insurance records, past citations, and social media footprints. It is a peculiar facet of modern criminality that the need for ego often outweighs the instinct for self-preservation. Investigators discovered that the Mustang wasn't just a car to its owner, it was a trophy. On various social media platforms, profiles linked to Delgado showcased the vehicle in various states of modification. The distinct aftermarket rims, the specific tint of the windows, and the unique exhaust note were all documented by the suspect himself in a quest for digital validation. The Shadow now had a name, a face, and a history of high-speed bravado. The warrant squad began their surveillance, mapping out Delgado's known associates and frequent haunts. The net was closing, not through a dramatic high-speed chase, but through the patient accumulation of data points. The arrest of Willie Joe Delgado was not a cinematic explosion of violence. It was a calculated, tactical maneuver executed in the quiet hours of the morning. When the warrant squad arrived at the residence, there was no grand escape, no defiant stand. There was only the heavy silence of a man who knew the city had finally caught up to him. In the sterile environment of the precinct interrogation room, the bravado seen in social media posts evaporated. Delgado sat across from veteran investigators who presented a mountain of evidence that was as inescapable as the laws of physics. They showed him the shattered windshield, the EDR data logs, and the surveillance footage that tracked his movements with predatory precision. The legal strategy now shifted to the nuances of culpable negligence. To secure a conviction of this magnitude, the prosecution had to prove that Delgado didn't just make a mistake, but that he consciously disregarded a substantial and unjustifiable risk. The sheer speed, the removal of the license plates, and the flight from a scene of obvious human suffering all pointed toward a mental state that the law finds particularly abhorrent. While the legal machinery ground forward, the families of the victims were left to navigate a landscape of grief that words can scarcely describe. The Bronx, for all its grit and noise, felt a collective shiver. A routine walk, a trip to the store, a moment of transition from one side of the street to the other. These are the mundane threads of life that were violently severed. The story of the July 3rd crash is a grim reminder that our cities are governed by a delicate social contract. We trust that the person behind the wheel of the 2-ton machine understands the lethal potential of their actions. When that trust is betrayed by ego and velocity, the consequences are measured in more than just broken glass and twisted metal. They are measured in the permanent absence of loved ones and the enduring trauma of a community. As Delgado's case moved through the judicial system, it served as a lighthouse for legislative change. It sparked conversations about street design, the regulation of high-performance vehicles in urban environments, and the efficacy of hit-and-run penalties. The Mustang, once a symbol of power and freedom for its driver, ended its journey in a police impound lot, a rusted, silent monument to a night where speed met tragedy. The shadow had been named, the evidence had been weighed, and the rhythm of the city, though momentarily disrupted by the screech of tires and the screams of witnesses, continued its relentless march forward. The case of Willie Joe Delgado is closed in the files of the NYPD. But for the people of the Bronx, the echoes of that July night remain, a haunting frequency in the background noise of 8 million stories